I'm from Southern California. I am a professed Microsoft junkie, but I have never worked for them. I've just spent my entire career using their products. And I am a senior consultant with Lobster Pot Solutions. So today we are going to be talking about how we can make our reporting services life cycle quick and efficient. And so these are various techniques that I have learned along the way. Several companies ago, I worked at a cancer diagnostic center, and I inherited a portfolio of over 300 reports. And what I had to do is take some of them out of Crystal Reports and move them to Reporting Services 2008, which was the latest and greatest at the time, take them out of 2005 and port them over, and decommission the bad ones and create new ones and prove that data was accurate, because there was a lot of bad data. And I developed a lot of things that I'm going to talk about in the next hour during that time, and I got the catalog down to 75 reports, and everybody was really happy about it, which was a great feeling to have. So we're going to talk about the life cycle of the reports, templates that you can use to help kickstart your report creation, some standards that I found have helped me. Yours may be different based on your environment, as well as some templates. I got the order mixed up. Templates for creating the reports would be like the requirements gathering, documentation, and then we'll talk about templates for actually kickstarting the reports. And then we're going to talk about some techniques that you can use to help manage your catalog over time, as well as keeping track of all the requests. Now, since this is a webinar, I can't see you. If you have pertinent questions that you need answered immediately, type them into Liz, and Liz, you have permission to interrupt me. I'll also ask other questions at breaking points. Any other questions that we don't capture during the presentation, we'll have time at the end to answer questions. If your questions are still not answered, then Liz will send me the list of unanswered questions, and I'll blog about it. And at the very end, I have what my blog site address is. So when we're creating reports, we have this list of tasks that we need to go through. We need to gather the requirements from our end users, and there may be more than one end user. We need to design what the report will not only look like, but how it will function. We need to create a mock-up of the report so that we can see from our end users if it is exactly what they are envisioning, because they're not always the best at telling us what they need. And while I can't see you, I think I saw every single one of you nod your head yes on that one. Sign off, which I'll talk about in a minute. We actually create the report, test the report, deploy the report, and then we do it all over again. Hopefully, not too many iterations on the same report, but sometimes that happens. I had one report that my end user kept asking for changes, and I got to like 10 to 14 iterations on that report. She was one of my big end users, so she had a lot of pull, but we did eventually cut her off and told her that we need to focus on other reports. So in this list, two of the biggest things that will help you is getting sign-off from your end users. These are also the two hardest things to get. The reason for that is it requires them to commit to what they've told you and commit to what you have created for them. If you can get these two things, it's wonderful. The easiest way to get sign-off is to tell them what your plan is at the beginning before you even gather your requirements. Go through this list, walk them through your process, talk about why you need the sign-off. Why do we need the sign-off? Well, the sign-off is to help minimize scope creep, because there's always going to be scope creep. They're going to forget that the formula got tweaked last week, or that they need this other column, or that they actually need the report based on created date instead of end date. There's always some little thing. But if you can hold off on those change requests until the next iteration, then you'll get your reports out faster. And if you can get these sign-offs at these particular stages, it helps the flow. It was amazing to watch the difference in attitude, the more seriousness about my process, as well as the minimizing of the change requests late in the process. Because after testing the report, that's when I was getting all my change requests, and that's too late. You really want them during the mock-up stage, because that's when they're looking at what they're going to get. So if you can get these, they're great. They don't have to be a big formal process. An email. Usually what I would do is after the mock-up, I would send an email to my end users and say, thank you for meeting me. This is what we discussed. This is what we agreed on. This is what I'm going to create for you. Can you please acknowledge your agreement on it? And that's all I had, and it worked wonderfully for me. So let's go ahead and start going through this list. The first 3 items can be grouped together if you're a one-person show, which is what I always was. If you are lucky and you have a BA to work with or a teammate who does all the requirements gathering while you do all the design, then this part you could break up into 2 documents. I started with 2 documents, a requirements gathering document and then a design document, and what I found is I was copying a lot of data from one doc to the other. You could also design the docs so that your BA or your partner is filling out the first half and then you're doing the second half. That could be another way to go, and I'm going to walk you through the template that I used in a minute. So let's talk about requirements gathering. What are some of the things that you want to gather in this stage? Because the more information you gather in your meetings, the more professional you'll look, and the less times you need to go back to them, because the end users have a full-time job as well, and they want to minimize the amount of time that they spend with you, but you want to maximize that time that is spent. So what I did is I created a document that had some standard information that I found I was always asking. And these were things that you may not get the first time around, but you're putting the seeds in the end user's mind on what you need to ask. This one particular person I already started telling you about, she was the manager of the QA department for the lab. She made sure that the labs were ran efficiently and accurately. And I worked with her so much that I got to a point where I could just send her a list of questions and she would send me the answers back. I didn't have to get a meeting with her until I was really ready to get the heart of the requirements. Some of these things are to me very important. For instance, the title and the purpose of the report. You may not put a lot of credence into the title, but guess what? That title is what they're always going to come back to you with. I can't tell you how many times that I stood in the kitchen at the company getting my cup of coffee and someone would come up to me and ask about the sales report. Well, we happen to have 5 or 6 different kinds of sales reports, and so sales report is not a good title. You really want to make sure your titles are strategic, unique, going to last through time as additional reports are added. So I always made sure that they told me what report they needed based on the title. If they couldn't remember, then I asked them to send me an email. And usually if I was getting coffee, I made them send me an email anyhow, because I was forgetful between getting my coffee and getting back to my desk. The purpose of the report is something that's very important, because what they describe to you and how they're going to use the report may not match up. So getting them to think about how they're going to use the report, have them give you a textual description so that you can include that in the report, that is all very beneficial. The owner of the report is really critical when you have multiple end users using the same report. And let me give you an example of that. I had someone from customer services, and I also had someone from, I think it was the sales team, and they needed the exact same data. So why should I create two reports? So what I did is I got both end users in the same room. I said, you're both going to be the owner of this report. I will always contact both of you when there's a change, but I need one of you to have kind of the carte blanche authority so that if there's a disagreement on what needs to happen, you two can settle it and I don't have to be in the middle. And they liked that, and that was very helpful. The owner of the report also helps when a change comes through from another department and you need to know who you need to talk to about making this change to report A. Also, the owner of the report can be helpful to know when that person leaves. For instance, when my QA manager left, what I did is I knew all her reports because I had the owner written down, and I went and talked to the new QA manager, and we went through the catalog describing what the reports. She threw some out, she had me change some, and me being proactive with that particular set of reports made me look like the hero, and it also allowed me to manage my report catalog in an efficient manner. When you're talking about the end users of the report, that kind of gets coupled with the security. You need to know how the various people are going to use the report. An example of this is a hierarchical sales report. I created a sales report that was used by the entire sales team. When the manager looked at it, he saw the details he needed, and he saw the details of each of the people that reported to him. When one of the sales reps looked at it, they couldn't see everybody else's sales. They only saw their specific sales. So I was able to do that with one report because I asked, how are the end users going to use the report? Can everybody see all the data or only some of the data? Is everybody in the entire company, can they all see the report, or is it only specific people? So by asking those questions, I was able to really hone in on the report before it ever went out to production. So let's take a look before we go down to this slide at my one of the documents I created, and I forgot to open it, so I need to go to Word. I can get to my desktop. There we go. And we will open this up. Now this is a document that I can hand out. It's, I think, already on my website. And what it is, it looks all nice and formal because people like in the sales department and the marketing department eat this up like candy. But it's already set up for you, so you can make it as simple or as complex as you need. What I did is I arranged it in the way that was most helpful for me. And it's the way I look at reports. If you look at reports differently, then set this up the way you need, because it's a tool for you to make your life easier and more efficient. One of the things that I would change in this document that I haven't is the mock-up. I would actually put it first. So I'm going to go to the end of this document to show you what the mock-up is so you know what we're talking about. For this particular sample, the mock-up is for the sales team. They wanted to see some metrics at the very top based on their various areas, and then they needed to see the customer count for each store for each sales rep. So Jack is a sales rep in France, which is in Europe, and he has 3 stores here. So what I did is, before I even had the mock-up, I started gathering data, and I started with this general information. You can read through it. I'm not going to read it all to you. Some of the things that I would ask that I found was always important was page orientation and paper size. I always think of all my reports first off in portrait, but they may not want it in portrait. They may need it in landscape because for regulatory purposes they have to print the report out because they need a hard copy and it has to go in the special binder, and they may need a specific paper size. We had some reports that were actually generated on the tabloid paper, which is bigger than legal. How do they want their data sorted? Have some general rules for formatting. For instance, do we need to have a green bar formatting? That's where every other row is a different color. So these were some questions that I found that I was asking all the time. Some specific SSRS settings. For instance, what export types? All 4 of these are always available. You can't turn them off for specific reports. I would love to see that feature in reporting services. But what I would do is I would ask them specifically, how are you going to export these reports when you give them to people? Then I would make sure that I tested that export type a lot more than I would the other types. If they're never going to go and dump it to a CSV file, then I would make sure that it works in case they do. Otherwise, I would spend most of my time on this report checking out the PDF to make sure that it printed out to PDF fine. I would start getting into various details. Now, while I have this block for subscription details, one of the things I did is I would ask my end users, let's gather the subscription details, but can we wait a couple weeks before we implement them? The reason for that is they have an idea of how often they want to get it or what parameter settings, but that might change after they actually see the report. They might even ask for additional subscription settings, and that way you don't have to redo your work. But I did have this document as a gathering place for my subscriptions. Subscription details. I would also start outlining all of the parameters as well as any summarized fields and then each of the different fields. Now this is a very technical area and I wouldn't sit with my end user gathering this information, but this section is really helpful if you're doing the gathering of the data and then handing it over to somebody else to create. And I found I was so happy that I had this when I was given a partner. He was brand new to the company. He is like gold. I wish I still worked with him. He came in, he read all my documentation on how I use this document. I gave him one and he created me a report. It was fabulous, and I had to talk to them a little bit about how I set this up because apparently I think a little differently. And so once he understood this particular table, he was able to take my documents and create reports for me, and it was absolutely wonderful. Now this particular column here, what it did is it was a quick way for me to designate various more advanced features that you can find in reporting services. For instance, grouping rows, drilling through to another report, bookmarks to move to another section of the report, and hyperlinks that might go to other assets that the company has. This particular report didn't have charts, but you can gather information here with charts. If you find that your company uses a lot of bar charts with secondary axes, then you might have a template in here to gather that information so that you always ask about the secondary axes, because I know that was something that I always forgot to ask. Finally, I would add a report sample. Now I cheated here. This is actually a reporting services mockup. One of the tools that I really liked using for creating mockups is called Balsamiq. I think it's B-A-L-S-A-M-I-Q. Yes, I think that's how you spell it. You can see it as an add-in to Chrome, or you can download it as an actual application. I liked it because the image was not crisp like this. It had little wavy lines for all the tables, which helped your end users realize it's not a finished report. Because if I show this mock-up to a salesperson, they ask if they can have it for the meeting that they have starting in 10 minutes because they think it's done, and it's not, because it's a mock-up. Another section that I started adding was this future release request. This was very helpful when you could see they're asking too much for this iteration of the report, especially if they say, can I have this by the end of the week? I have this deadline and I can't get out of it. Okay, well, let's only add the features that you need by Friday. Let's hold off on the other features that are more complicated because I have to do XY research, or I need to create these extra tables to be able to support that. Let's document it here and we'll have a second release. And they were usually really good with that. This was also a great place for capturing any other scope creep that happened down the line that you wanted to capture while you're still creating the report. Are there any questions yet? Okay, I'm going to keep going.
Yep, yeah, I would keep going. Oh, actually, can you give that mock-up tool? Can you give that mock-up tool again?
It's called Balsamic, and I will. Let's see, B-A-L Balsamic. I gotta write it down because I always forget. B-A-L-S-A-M-I-Q is how I believe it is spelled. Let's see if I look up in Google, because I think I actually have it. Oh, here it is. B-A-L-S-A-M-I-Q, Mockups. So this is a little add-in to Chrome. This is a great place to play with it because it's free here, but you're really limited on how you use the product. And then there's a paid version. It's really cheap when you compare it to other products. I love it. All right, let's see. Gathering requirements, creating a design. When you're creating a design, you want to think about all these various things. Labels are very important. This is how people compare reports. You might be surprised that you created report A and report B for two different departments 6 months apart, and then you find out 3 months later that they're comparing them and they're wondering why data doesn't match. If you have the labels for the same data across the reports, it makes it easier for them to match disparate reports. But you also need to make sure that parameter types are matching as well. I don't have that on here. I have that on another slide. For instance, say your company has a lot of metrics around sales data. You want to try and get as many reports that use the same date parameter, for instance, created date, because the people will try comparing reports when they have different dates. If report A is based on created date and report B is based on completed date, I can guarantee you people are going to get together and try comparing the summary statistics on those two reports, and they're going to wonder why they don't match. It's because they're using disparate dates. So if you can even talk your end users into standardizing on a particular date for their parameters, it will make them happy and it will make you happy. It's not always possible, but then you have to make sure that they understand that they can't compare report A and report B because the data will never match. Algorithms are important to get ahead of time so that you can test them out with your test data. I would also include them in that requirements document spelled out so that they can verify them later on in the user acceptance testing. I talked about my stored procedures in my design document, but that's because I had a partner. That may not be necessary. It depends on how OCD you are, like I am, or how much time you have for creating your design document. And the other three things I talked about already. When creating a mock-up, several things that are important. It's usually better to use example data. I know some of us get to use actual data, but when you do, you need to make it clear that it's out of date. One of the things that I did on my mockups, not when I used my balsamic tool, but when I actually did the user acceptance testing for the reports, is I had a watermark in the back that said sample. Otherwise, you're going to show the data to your sales team, and they're going to freak out because there's $100,000 missing. So you want to make your data lifelike, but you need to also help them understand that it is not real data. Examples of the formulas and the calculations, that is very important in the mock-ups so that they can validate. Placement of data is always important so that they know what the report's going to look like. Labels I talked about, and any special features. Sometimes I would have multiple mock-ups. This is what it looks like when I roll up the data for end user A, and this is what it looks like when I'm showing all the detailed data for end user B. The addendum. Oh, I love this document. Oh, let's see, let's go pull it up. I had to go back to Word. I forgot to pull that one up for you too. Let's see here, requirements. What I did with this document, this is when you have to create a new, oh, of course I can't, I don't have it. I apologize for this. Nope, that's the same one. Open, computer, addendum. There we go. What I did in the addendum is it allows me not to have to go through that entire process for any changes. I broke it down into the minimum amount that I needed. The general information, so I know which report that my colleague needs to go work on after gathering all this information, or the addendum may be something that I gather the information for and don't work on for 3 months. So now I know any reference tickets that I need to have, the title of the report. I broke out bugs from new modifications because they really are two different things. Bugs, you need to make sure that they aren't repeated, while new modifications, you go through your standard unit testing cycle. I then created a new mock-up if I needed. That's when there's cosmetic changes. For a bug, you may not have that. And then any postponed modifications. This is, again, when they give you too much to do in the time allotted, you can document the modifications that you're going to do later. This is a golden document. I love this thing. And I used it quite a bit, especially with that QA manager. So let's go back to my slide. Report templates. Notice I said plural. I created a report template for each layout that I had. So I had a portrait, I had a landscape, I had a legal. I never got to it, but eventually I would have created a tabloid one since I was starting to find a lot more reports on that particular paper. For the template, I created my header and my footer since they were always standard. Instead of sample, I put draft as my watermark. And then if you notice that I have the, oh, that was a horrible square. I have this little bar chart of colors here. What that is my color palette. And that's just a little tablix, and I'm going to open one up so you can see it. And it made it great when my color palette was hexadecimals. I used to have to look them up on a piece of paper that I had tacked to the wall. But when I put it on my template, I just copy and pasted the background color to whatever color property I needed and the way I went. And that saved me keystrokes, which is always a good thing. So let's take a look at my templates, how I created them and where you put them. So this is actually a template project. This is where I maintain my templates for whenever I need to change them. I have for myself, I created a utility database, and in here had some standards that I wanted to have in my production database, my QA database, and my development database. And it had things like an environment ID. When the environment ID said production, that draft watermark disappeared. When it said QA and it said dev, then the draft watermark appeared, and that way I didn't have to change my report as it went through the life cycle. I then created a standard stored procedure that went and gathered that information and brought it into each of my reports. And then I created, here I have two different templates, a landscape and a portrait. In these reports, these are just standard RDLs, I went ahead and created linked data source and a linked data set so that they would automatically be put in this brand new report. And here you can see that this is just a tablex, and the background color of these cells contains the hexadecimal or the user-friendly name for the background colors for me to change. So let's create a brand new report, a brand new project, so that you can see how easy it is to bring in a template. So I'm going to call this one Demo March 3, Demo, hit OK. No, I don't want to go through the wizard. So now I need to bring in the data source, the data set, and then create a brand new report. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I right-clicked, Add, New Item, and in this special folder I have the utility data source. I'm going to move the number 1 because I want it to be called utility. I'm going to do the same thing for data set. Right-click, Add, New Item, grab Get Report Standards, hit Add, and now it's added there as well. And we can close these because we don't need to look at them. And now when I hit right-click on Reports, Add, New Item, I can see that I have a template landscape and a template report. So I'm going to call this one Cool Report. Hit Add, and you can see that it already has a link to the utility data source and to the data set's stored procedure. It also has my tablex, so if I were to drag a table onto here, I can go ahead and select this dark green, copy, select my row of my brand new table, and paste the background color. And I'm going to change the color of the fonts to white so that we can see the writing. And then when I run it, we'll get a brand new table, and it has that dark background. When I'm all done designing my report, I just remove this tablex and I'm all done. And I've got my standard footer here. Some information you might want to put in your standard footer would be a copyright. Another very important thing to put down here is some sort of tracking number. And I think I talk about that later in my slides, so I'll hold off on that, talking about that right now. I have a place for my titles, and I have my company logo. That particular logo, I used to be an artist, and that was the logo for my business. So if you're curious where that particular logo came from. So let me take a sip of coffee. For many of you, I don't know where you're all scattered throughout the world, but I'm in California, so it's still very early for me. So let's take a look at the presentation slide deck again. Color schemes, let's see, tracking number. I do talk about tracking number. All right, so let's talk about tracking number. What I did for the company that I was at, I used TFS, Team Foundation Server, which is a Microsoft product. You could use other products like Subversion. They have a product you can use called Unfuddle that works with Subversion, which is a repository to keep your code. I created a ticket in Team Foundation Server for each of my reports. And I was able, they have tools for you to create custom tickets, work items. So I created a custom one that kept track of all the very important details that I found that I needed to report on for my reports, as well as a life cycle, a workflow, so that I knew when it was in design, when it was in QA, when it was in production, and when it moved back into design. So these work items always lived for the entire life of a particular report. I took that ID for that work item and I put it in the footer of my report as the kind of the whole number portion. I then had a decimal portion that was the iteration number of how many times it went to production. Not how many times it went to QA, but how many times it went to production. This was also very helpful when I needed to validate that a report I thought was put into production, whether it actually made it to production or not. That way I could go and talk to the release manager to find out why my report hadn't made it to production. It also allowed me to keep track of how many times my end user requested changes. And that particular number is when my manager saw that it had hit double digits and asked me to stop making changes for that particular report for my end user. Another piece of information that I included in my tracking number was whether my particular report was going to the transactional system or the data warehouse. For us, the data warehouse was always a day late. So if I saw that I had my little DW, I could then talk to the end user, oh, you don't have the changes that you made an hour ago in the system because this report is from the data warehouse. You'll see that those number changes tomorrow because the data in the data warehouse will be updated tonight. This is the lovely location for your templates. I forgot to mention that earlier. You can download the slide deck so that you can get this. This is also easily Googled. You can also send me an email if you forget it, because that is a very long path. And it changes based on the version that you're using. This 10.0 is for SQL, or sorry, not SQL, Visual Studio 10, I think, is the one that I'm using, which is used with SQL 2012. So you drop those RDLs, and I can show you that. I have a path here in my favorites, SSRS templates. This is that lovely path location. I have a copy of my data source. I have a copy of the data set, and I have the two templates that I created in here. And this is where you go whenever you hit new report or new data set. You can put as many templates in here as you so desire. Now we talked about that. We are on this one now. There we go. So some general tips that I have when I'm creating reports. Display the chosen parameter values on the report. This is not only beneficial to your end user, but this is beneficial to you when they come asking about the results on a particular report. They may come to you and say, this report took 20 minutes to generate. Why? And they hand you the report. When you look at the parameters, you see that they asked for 2 years worth of data when you designed the report to only show 2 weeks worth of data. Now you can talk to them about, are they going to always ask for 2 years worth of data, or did they mistype their parameters? It also allows them to know what they printed out. If they don't have the parameters listed, then they can't recreate that exact report. I already talked about standardizing dates across reports. Test your reports across all export types for readability. I've got a great story on this one. I had a report that was not traditionally exported to Excel. It was traditionally exported to CSV, which then opened up into Excel, which gives you better control over being able to sort the data in Excel. But this particular end user liked all of the pretty formatting and wanted it exported directly to Excel. When he printed it, he got this big, huge watermark that said COM. And he comes to me, I'm like, I don't have a watermark that says COM. I have one that says draft, and it's disabled in production. He goes, but it says there, COM. I'm like, okay, big black letters, so I can't even read the data underneath it. So I go to his desk, I have him walk me through it. I don't see COM. I go, okay, print it. And he printed it. Well, guess what? There's some little bug in, that one was Reporting Services 2008 R2, that when you created a footer with fields that were concatenated together, it blew up that particular text box to 72-point font. And it was hidden in the footer of the Excel document, which is why we didn't see it when we did a print preview, or not print preview, when we just looked at it in Excel, and it created this big, huge black watermark, and he couldn't read the data. So I started, I added to my testing list to look at the print preview of each of the export types that I had to support. Lay out the report in a consistent manner. What I'm talking about there is making sure that whenever possible, put the same columns in the same location across reports. So if you always have a created date and an end date that you show on, say, 30% of your reports, always put it, and they usually want it on the left side, then I would put them on the left side in my mockups so that they have a visual cue of where to find that report, that data on all reports that have that data. Using a consistent color palette, that is beneficial for a couple different reasons. One, your reports look professional. Two, they look really pretty. And three, you can change that color palette when there is a big change in your reporting environment. Let me give you an example. We were moving from 2008 to 2008 R2, and I wanted to know the difference in the reports so that I knew what people were looking at. So I changed the color palette. This gave my end users a visual cue that something was different, and so that they can look to see if there was any modifications to their reports. So it was a helpful tool for me and for my end users. Number 6 is the gold. If you don't get anything else out of this presentation, remember number 6, create a knowledge-based document. This, I can't tell you how many times I've used that knowledge-based document. I was in it this week helping a friend, actually. I can't share mine. I apologize because I was bad about documenting where I got my little tips and tricks. So what I would suggest is not only keeping track of these techniques, write or include the URL or the person you got it from, so that you can share it with others without feeling guilty that you're not giving credit where credit is due. Things that I would include in there, I included a little phrase that would help remind me what this particular technique was about, like green bar or VB code or something. I then talked about what the technique was. I put my name and the date that I created it, and now I include the URL of where I got that tip. And then I keep it, and it is a really wonderful thing to have. Leverage report logs to determine usage patterns and load on the system. All right, that kind of leads us into, no, not this slide, another slide, so I'll still talk about it. What it does is in SQL Server, you have this entire database called Report Server that manages all your reports. When I first got into reporting services, it was brand new, and I was scared to touch this database. Don't be scared. Just don't change anything in it. But go in there and poke around. There's a lot of information in here. The catalog table has a list of all of your reports. there is a view called Execution Log 3, and it will tell you how your reports are being used. And you can take a look at what's in it. I ran it, and I have things in here. Let's see, let's take a look at some reports. Here's a report that I ran called Customer Orders Manager, and let's highlight that whole row. I can see what the parameters were when I ran it. I can see the date that I executed it. I can see how long it took to retrieve the data, how long to process, and how long to render. There is a lot of information in here, and you can use it to find out how often reports are being ran, who is running them. That should be in here somewhere. Here it is. I had a user called B. Smith. You can also find out whether reports are being used or not. Excuse me. So what I did is I joined Execution Log 3 to the catalog table, and I wanted to find out what reports are not being used in a folder that started with the word techniques. And here I found, this first one is just the folder name. I found I have 4 reports in that folder that no one is using. So what I would do is I would go and talk to those end users. Is this just a yearly report or a quarterly report? If not, are you using these? Can I decommission these so that I can clean up my catalog? So there's a lot of great data in here. Oops, I apologize for that. So I talked a little bit about this, the tracking number. When I am maintaining my catalog of my reports, a couple of other pieces of information, or one other piece of information that I would keep for me and for my manager was this new report that I'm working with. What kind of report? Is it a brand new report? The company's never had it. Is it replacing an existing report? If it is, which report or reports, plural, is it replacing? And once that report is no longer being used, it would get the designation of archived. This allowed me to create a report on my reports to give to my manager to let him or her know the progress that I had on my work. I would keep track of any change requests that I had in a tracking system. That allowed me to figure out what my next work would be, and I always cross-reference. I cross-referenced everything. When I would create a ticket with a new feature, I would immediately tie it to the ID number for that report, which I talked about. I also made sure that I notified all the end users, or at least the owners of the reports, before I made the change, during user acceptance testing, and after it was deployed to production, so that they could tell all of their people what was changed, how they need to use the report, or anything that was fixed on the report. I talked about this, why I would want to keep track of an owner. And that is it. So in this presentation, and I'll take questions in a minute, so you could start typing your questions if you have any. We talked about the life cycle of the report. We talked about some various templates for gathering requirements, as well as an addendum report for gathering changes to existing reports. I talked about some standards that I implement across all my reports. We talked about how to create templates and where to store them so that you can create new reports quickly with some standard information on there. And we briefly talked about maintaining your report over time, as well as showing you a view and a way to use that view in the report server database so that you can find out more information about your reports. So, are there any questions, Liz?
Yes. All right, here we go. Is there a way to bulk change the owner of a subscription? We have people leave and then their account is deleted, the subscription stopped working.
That is a good question. I did have one of my friends ask that question on Twitter a while ago, and that information is stored in the report server database. But changing it directly in the report server database made me uncomfortable. So you may have to go in there this first time and change it independently. What I would recommend instead is to use distribution lists instead of specific people. This will allow you to add people to the subscription along the way, as well as remove people without having to go and change the owners themselves. If you do want to try changing the owners in the report server database, I would definitely do it in development first. Make sure that there's no hidden changes that report server is doing in the background that are obfuscated from you. Next question.
Okay. What if a company doesn't have procedures for gathering requirements and creating and keeping documentation?
Well, if they don't have it and you liked what you saw here, then you could take this presentation idea and you can take the sample templates that I have and go talk to your manager about implementing it. Some companies don't need it. It's too much red tape. Other companies sorely need it because the end users are abusing the system and you're never able to get done with work because they're constantly inundating you with requests. By applying these techniques, it will help streamline your work. When I first went to Clariant, none of this existed and I developed it over time, a little bit at a time. You might find that your manager may not be ready for all of these techniques, so maybe you start doing it for yourself, and then as they see the benefit, they'll probably want other people in your department to start leveraging it.
Okay. Can you recommend some sort of standards for data sources?
Do you mean how to use it in with reporting services for data sources? I did standardize my data sources. There's a couple things that you can do. Let's see here. In reporting services, I'm not sure, I don't think 2008 had this, but this is 2012. 2008 R2 might have it. You can create the concept of shared data sources. Right here, this is, well, okay, so some standards. One, I created a folder for all my data sources. I also, data sets is the part that you can do shared in 2012. And I created one for any shared data sets. This allowed me to have one location for that get report standards data set that I was showing you, and all my reports can use it. So if I change it in one place, then it affects everybody. Just make sure that you test everything. For my data sources, I put all my data sources in this one place, and they were the names of the servers. You may, depending on how complicated your environment, you may have to divide it up more granular and keep them in here. Then I have all my reports, I apologize, go back to home. I have all my reports hit those particular data sources. So when I go into this techniques folder and I go to manage, I can see that on my data sources, I'm hitting the utilities database and it is in this particular folder. If you move a report here and this link is broken, then you hit browse and you can browse directly to it and you can select that utility data source. So that's how I manage my data sources. If that's not quite what you meant, you can email me more information on that question. Before I take the next question, let me move to the next slide. That way people that do drop off can have this information and we can answer questions as long as we have. If you go to the resources directory on my website, you can find the slide deck and the resources If they are not there, let me know and I will get them up there and I'll validate that they're there after this presentation. You can send me questions to my website, my email. I get to them when I can. Sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it could be 5 minutes, it depends on my day. You can follow me on Twitter if you choose. I don't always talk about SQL, I talk about other things like my puppy. And I did co-author a book on reporting services, and you can find that book on Amazon. So let's continue with questions then.
Okay. Does the report server database store the name of the source's table names for a particular report?
That is a good question. There is some information in here. It's not stored table-wise. I think I usually use stored procedures, so the stored procedure information is what I would find. Let's see, data sources, data sets. Let's query this guy. Select top. Well, that wasn't very helpful. That's data sets. I would have to go through and look to find it. I haven't had to find it in a while. I'm pretty sure you can find that in here. If not, if you're using stored procedures, then it would just be the stored procedure name. If it's actual tables that you've brought in, it's going to be in here somewhere. And send me more questions on that topic if you're having trouble finding it.
Okay. What tool do you use for your report catalog?
I used TFS, Team Foundation Server. They have a add-in to it where you can create your own work items. So then I customized my work item to fit the needs of my report catalog. For instance, the title of the report as well as the folder that it was being stored in. Owner was another field that I added. I tried to use as many of the fields that are natively available in Team Foundation Server because it made it easier for other people to query and to tie to other types of work items. But if it didn't exist, then I created my own. The great thing about Team Foundation Server is you can export live data to Excel, and your manager can see what's going on in your report catalog from Excel and refresh it in Excel. You can also create views of what the data looks like in Team Foundation Server.
All right. One last question. If a report is set up as a subscription, how can I tell if subscribers are actually accessing the report?
Oh, you can also do that in the execution log 3. It will actually have an entry in here. Let me see. I created a report for another class, and here it is, report catalog summary. So this was a report I created on that execution log 3 view. And what I did is right here it says interactive. This is something I was grouping on. You would get another one that would say subscriptions, and then it will tell you information about that report as well as the subscription information. So that's going to tell you if it's going out. You could then compare that to Active Directory if you're using Active Directory to see if reports are going to people who are no longer at the company. If they're actually using the report itself, that's a little trickier because I think it would you have no access into their email box if you're sending them a PDF. But here you can see what reports are having subscriptions generated, and then you could talk to those end users, maybe send out a survey to them to see if they're still utilizing their subscriptions.
Okay, great. We are
question.
Yeah, we are out of time. I know there are a ton of questions that we did not get to. Unfortunately, with our time constraints, it's just not possible to get to everything. But what I will do is I will send all the questions to Mickey, and hopefully she can do a follow-up blog for us and try to answer a majority of those questions for us.
Yes, and I will work on that this weekend.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. And again, if you have any questions, you can email me directly, Liz. You get that in your reminders, or you can email Mickey, and we'll be happy to answer any of those questions. And we'll also let you know on our social media when that blog is posted. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you.